I have now watched Season 1 of the original series of Star Trek, and I've made some notes. It was the remastered edition I watched, and it was apparent that some of the special effects had been greatly improved. That was an unexpected and pleasant surprise. One thing that is very clear about Star Trek is that it does present a completely humanist approach to life. There are practically no religious elements at all to the show, and there are no atheist views either. If you've watched my introduction to Dreams in Space, you'll know that I'm very much in favour of that approach. There is, however, one profoundly philosophical moment in the first season that deals with the question of authority, religious or otherwise, and I did find that part quite fascinating, as Spock might say. I'll come back to that point when I get to the episode in question. I'm going to start at the beginning though, as I usually do, and work my way through the episodes in series order. The pilot episode surprised me a little bit. I'd watched it several times before, of course, but perhaps I hadn't paid as much attention. Some of the things mentioned in it really hit home with me. Let me give you a few examples. A man either lives life as it happens to him, meets it head on and licks it, or he turns his back on it and withers away. When dreams become more important than reality, you give up travel, building, creating. You even forget how to repair the machines left behind by your ancestors. It is wrong to create a whole race of humans to live as slaves. A person's strongest dreams are about what he can't do. The last one I can relate to particularly strongly. I think perhaps that feeling gets stronger as you grow older, or maybe it gets stronger the more you think about the things you can't do. In the first episode with Kirk, Spock and McCoy, we do get a feel for the different approaches of the three primary crew members. We see the logical approach of Spock contrasted with the emotional approach of McCoy, and we learn a little bit about the drive, discipline and responsibility required to command a starship. We also learn that mysteries give you a bellyache. In the second episode we learn what a girl is. Kind of important. We also learn that teenage emotions and absolute power are really not a good combination. Spock asks of McCoy, "Are you speaking scientifically or emotionally?" Again emphasizing the difference in their approach. And finally we get a little bit of philosophy from James T. Kirk. There are a million things in this universe you can have, and a million things you can't. That's the way things are. From what I gather, episode 3 was meant to be the second pilot for the show, and just like the first one, it contains a great deal of thought-provoking and philosophical ideas. We learn that Kirk is better at chess than Spock, for example. This is clearly illogical, but the point being made is that the logical approach has its limits. Sometimes, in order to win, you have to think outside the rules. In a conversation later with Gary Mitchell, we learn that Kirk is a great thinker. Gary Mitchell also mentions the work of the philosopher Spinoza, describing it as simple. Perhaps it's simple because reality is simple. We're given the impression that Gary knows differently though, and later we learn that he thinks it's all about pleasure. "You'll enjoy being a god, Elizabeth," he tells her. Finally, we also learn that compassion is another part of Kirk's psyche, and Gary, with all his newfound powers, doesn't value that. Episode 4 starts with a very simple lesson. If you're on a faraway alien planet, and lots of people are dead, don't remove your gloves to scratch your nose. We also learn that space still contains infinite unknowns, and that Scotty cannot change the laws of physics. However, Kirk, Spock and Scotty combined can. And last, but by no means least, we learn that Kirk loves the Enterprise. Episode 5 is all about good versus evil, which turns out to be a more complicated question than you might think. I won't say much more about this episode, except to say that George Lucas might have seen it, and perhaps he realised that he could use some of those ideas in another science fiction setting. Episode 6 emphasises the point that men need women, and it tells us that no one is a paragon of virtue. We also learn that lithium crystals are worth 300 times their weight in diamonds, and much more than gold. I wonder why that is. And finally, you either believe in yourself or you don't. Episode 7 talks about the possible benefits of being able to upload your thoughts and consciousness into an artificial life form. It sounds like a tempting idea, but of course it doesn't quite work out as hoped. Which leads you to the question, are some things too good to be true? Episode 8 contains a very interesting message, and perhaps it was one of the motivations that inspired Gene Roddenberry to create Star Trek. Kirk says, "Children have an instinctive need for adults. They want to be told right from wrong." How best could you do that, I wonder? Once again we see Spock's logical approach questioned. This time it is McCoy who delivers the lesson. And then finally we learn that growing up is a good thing. In episode 9, Spock presents the Vulcan view that emotion is the cause of violent behaviour. The solution, he claims, is to get rid of emotion. Presumably, McCoy doesn't think very much of this solution. We learn that Dr. Adams is driven by some sort of utopian vision. It sounds good in principle. He says, "May we never find space so vast, planets so cold, heart and mind so empty, that we cannot fill them with love and warmth." In episode 10 we see clearly Kirk's spirit and determination. He faces the unknown and the challenges it brings. There are a couple of interesting points too. Kirk describes the Enterprise as a united Earth ship, which leads me to think that Star Trek really does present a very hopeful vision of our future. Also, the game to play in outer space is poker. I think Londo says something similar about that in Babylon 5. Finally, we learn that successful aliens probably take the same approach to life as we do, i.e. that the ideas we've seen in this episode are universal. In episodes 11 and 12, it is made absolutely clear that Spock's master is logic. When logic calls, he has no choice but to obey. And McCoy tells us that the brain is what life is all about. Another idea from the pilot episode is repeated here. Force is often needed to get things done. One of the aliens says, "Wrong thinking will be punished. Right thinking will be as quickly rewarded. You will find it an effective combination." In episode 13, Kirk says, "Worlds may change, galaxies disintegrate, but a woman always remains a woman." If we hadn't realised it already, we now see that Kirk has great skills with women. And later we learn that he is also interested in justice. If you don't know much about Shakespeare, after this episode you will know that Hamlet is set in violent times, when life was cheap and ambition was God. We also learn it is possible to become deluded about how we see the world, tragically in this case. Finally, there is the observation I mentioned earlier about authority. When Kirk is asked, "Who are you to say what harm was done?" he replies, "Who do I have to be?" Episode 14 is another episode that in simple language explains the most profound ideas. In this case, our propensity as a species for waging war. We learn that Romulans are essentially Vulcans with emotions. This is a bad combination, and they are considered savage, even by human standards. It's worth noting that we haven't actually met the Klingons yet. Episode 15 is the first episode that takes a less serious approach. Life can be relaxed and we can have fun too. It takes the same approach that we see again in Star Trek 4. Mr. Spock finds it all most illogical. There are a few other ideas that are seminal in this episode. There is a character called the Caretaker, for example, and the planet they're on is a little bit like the holodeck of the Next Generation. Episode 16 is one of my favourite episodes, and it puts the idea that logic is the best basis for command to the test. I like the way that in the earlier episodes Spock's logical approach is questioned, but in this episode we see why it is important to approach the problems that face us logically. We learn that fear can be a useful force, but only when it is necessary to use it. And we also learn that it is possible to do all the right things, but not get the expected result, i.e. that life isn't always fair or logical. In episode 17 we are shown another hopeful vision of the future. Kirk tells us that in the 23rd century our missions are peaceful. When we do battle it is only because we have no choice. Spock also objects to intellect without discipline, and power without constructive purpose. In other words, logic can be wise too, or perhaps we might say that logic is a source of wisdom. In episode 18 we are presented with some more examples of philosophical observations. Power gives us choice, and mercy is an advanced trait. So there's hope for humanity, and we also get told that 1,000 years is just a little time. Episode 19 makes a couple of bold claims about the nature of the universe. Firstly, that time travel is possible, and secondly, and perhaps more incredibly for the 1960s, that planets dominated by women do exist. We learn that life is all about chance. We all have to take a chance, especially if one is all you have. In episode 20, Kirk intends to fight, and he believes in his innocence. I noted three lessons from this episode. Nothing is more important than Kirk's ship. A man must have rights, and that discipline and the Enterprise do not change. It's great to watch episode 21 again with the knowledge that the ideas within it led to the creation of the Federation's greatest enemy, the Borg. A machine's concept of perfection is not the same as ours, and that makes a great idea for a story. There's only one word to describe episode 22. If you want to shout it out loud, please go ahead and do so. Kirk is nicely pragmatic in this episode. Spock tells him that insufficient facts always invite danger. His response is, well, we'd better get some facts. Khan is confident of his superior ability, and it's clear that he is meant to be an equal match for Kirk. Episode 23 makes it clear that even Kirk has orders. He's told to establish the Federation. The people of the planet below think theirs is the better way. Kirk and the rest of the crew of the Enterprise see it differently though, and Scotty believes that the best diplomat he knows is a fully activated phaser bank. Kirk didn't start the trouble, but he intends to finish it. Who else do we know from science fiction that has that philosophy? Perhaps JMS watched a few episodes of Star Trek too. And at the end we're told that Spock almost believes in luck, which might be another idea picked up by George Lucas. Episode 24 has a few things to say about human nature. There's nothing sadder than dreams that fail, for example. And we learn that Spock has seen a dragon, which is a nice reminder that Star Trek is also about visions of other worlds. Man stagnates if he has no ambition, no desire to be more than he is. And maybe we're not meant for paradise. Episode 25 is another well-known and favourite episode, and of course it contains one of McCoy's most well-known quotes. The moral of this episode is a simple one. Cooperating with other living things is a good idea. Episode 26 was perhaps partly an inspiration for Star Trek Insurrection. It's about an advanced race of beings who prefer to live a simpler life. This is also the first episode with the Klingons, and what an entrance they make. Kor, played by John Colicos, is brilliant in the role. Like the Romulans, the Klingons believe that strength is the primary asset, and when you are strong, that is the time to act. Episode 27 is one of the stranger episodes of Star Trek. We learn that sometimes pain can drive a man harder than pleasure, which reminds me of Jacquard's view that the future is always born in pain. We're also told that madness has no purpose or reason, but it may have a goal. And in the end, although Kirk acts for the benefit of the many, he still cares about what happens to the one who has to be sacrificed. This idea, of course, is revisited in Star Trek 2, 3 and 4. Episode 28 presents another hopeful humanist view of life, but with several interesting twists. It's one of the more well-known and favourite episodes as a result. Edith Keeler insists that we do survive, because the days and years ahead are worth living for. She has a vision of the future that is the same as the world that Kirk has come from. This impresses Kirk greatly, and of course he falls in love with her as a result. The last episode in Season 1 explains how to deal with those difficult moral problems, the kind of problems that psychologists like to ask people. The trolley problem, for example. As Bones says, if killing 5 people saves 10, it's a bargain. Is that your simple logic, Mr. Spock? The solution, of course, is to find another way. If only we could always do that in real life. The last thing we learn in Season 1 of Star Trek is that Spock is the best first officer in the fleet. You're not going to get any argument from me about that.